सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Why do I read publications like mining.com? In fact, how is it my business to read publications like mining.com? That's a good question. The answer is multifold. So one, I'm a journalist. I read everything. I'm so inclined to say I read all kinds of rubbish, but I say rubbish there as a term of endearment, which many people may not get it. So I read anything that might not look relevant to many others. Second, that Google knows it and Elon Musk knows it or Twitter knows it, that lately I've been researching on how countries have been collecting and how they are dealing with their foreign exchange reserves. So I've been dealing with sovereign national reserves, because of which, and why was I doing it? Because I was also researching an episode of Cut The Clutter that we did on de-dollarization, or the idea of de-dollarization, or the debate around de-dollarization, creation of a BRICS currency, the Chinese yuan rising, etc., last week. So because all of these smart entities, Google, Twitter, Elon Musk, etc., know that I was researching that. So on my feed, they've been throwing up a lot of connected reading, some of which turned out to be from mining.com. And because I'm a journalist and I'm curious, right? I'm curious also about things that might look irrelevant at first sight. I read these up. So the two things that caught my eye on mining.com have to do with gold. I've been reading some indications in international publications. I've read on Reuters, Bloomberg, FT, many of the others. Also some TV discussions that gold is back in fashion. Gold is back in fashion. I don't mean in terms of human beings. With human beings, gold never goes out of fashion, particularly in a country like India, which buys so much gold. So that is not the issue. Gold is back in fashion with sovereign nations. Sovereign nations now are buying gold as if it was going out of fashion. So over the last 6-8 months, the buying of gold, the purchase of gold by the nations for their foreign exchange reserves has gone up to quite an extent. It's gone up sufficiently to merit several articles on mining.com, which tracks the mining business and which has a stake in the mining business. Of course, when they write an article on gold, they also ended by recommending that everybody should buy gold. So don't identify me with any of those recommendations. All investments make their own choices and they know that all markets have risks. So that I'm not going there. I'm sharing two articles with you from mining.com, essentially because they talk about what is it that the nations are doing with gold. In fact, if you do want to understand what nations are doing, one very good way of starting is to look at what India has been doing. So if you look at India's own record from first quarter of 2020, remember, second quarter of 2020, by that time the world knew that COVID was a big, serious global problem. It was a genuine pandemic. So since the first quarter of 2020, India has been adding to its gold reserves. So 653 tons, and tons is a simpler metric than value because value keeps changing, gold prices fluctuate. So 653 tons in the first quarter of 2020, next quarter 661, then 668. India is not a very big, rich country, but slowly it's been adding to its gold reserves. This was a period, in fact, in which many of the other countries were selling out from their gold reserves and accumulating other things. But India, on the other hand, has been adding to gold reserves. So from 653 tons, and you can see the graphic, 653 tons, it's a steady increase, 653, 661, 668, 676, 695. It's almost by design, as if each quarter some 8-10 tons are being bought. 743. Now this is quarter 3 of 21. India has made a sizable purchase. That is 30 tons, and that would have registered on global markets. And you can imagine why third quarter 2021, because that's when the impact of COVID and the global currency markets there is a little bit of instability in world markets. So maybe that was a smart thing to do. And once again, it goes up. So today, India's gold reserves are 787 tons, beginning with 653 tons about 3 years ago. The important thing is every quarter India has added to its gold reserves. Now, India is adding steadily, but look at what's happening elsewhere. What's happening elsewhere is look at Russia. Russia has added suddenly a lot of gold reserves. Russia's gold reserves have remained constant for a long time. Russia, by the way, at this point is the second largest producer of gold in the world, although since the sanctions began, Russian gold has been barred from global markets. So if you look at Russia, Russia had remained nearly consistent up to the last quarter of 2022. But now suddenly Russians began to buy, and also they've released their data. Maybe they've released older data. So mining.com tells us that Russians have added another 32 tons of gold to their reserves. That is a lot of addition, because you know that India every year has been buying about 7 to 10 tons. So Russia has added, or at least has declared, the addition of 32 tons. But the important thing is, even more important than what Russia has bought, is what is happening with China, because China drives global markets in so many ways now. And gold is a very political commodity. Gold is also a very geostrategic commodity. So when the Chinese starts talking of gold, you start reading the tea leaves in very different ways. I'm sorry to mix the Chinese metaphor with the Chinese purchase of gold, but yes, reading the tea leaves is very much a Chinese metaphor. So the Chinese are accumulating gold. That means they are either looking at a crisis or they are getting out of the dollar. Every country in the world got a bit scared after the Americans froze Russian assets as the sanctions came, and very many commentators globally have said that that was one of the biggest mistakes that Biden administration made, because they destroyed trust in the dollar. So most countries then, which are not really American allies or NATO countries, for example, they'd start thinking that tomorrow, what is to stop some American president? Maybe it isn't somebody as boring and as dull as Joe Biden. Maybe it's somebody as exciting as Donald Trump. Donald Trump, high on something, may just get angry with your country and decide to seize your assets or deny you your dollar reserves. So most countries outside of the NATO zone have been looking at diversifying away from the dollar. That's the truth. What is not correct is de-dollarization in the sense of another currency rising. So countries are moving into other currencies. As I explained in that de-dollarization episode, countries are moving into Swedish krona, moving into the euro, moving into even South Korean won, right? They are not moving into yuan, don't worry. And they are not about to move into any BRICS currency, and they won't be a BRICS currency. And you will see the further evidence of why they will not be a BRICS currency, because BRICS nations themselves don't believe that they will be BRICS currency. I will give you the evidence in just a minute. So the Chinese have been buying. For the 5th month running, mining.com tells us, the Chinese have made record purchases of gold. So in the month of March, Chinese bought 18 tons of gold in 1 month. India is averaging 8 to 9 tons of gold every quarter, while India has been increasing its stockpile of gold. The Chinese bought 18 tons in just the month of March. In the 2 months before that in this year, that is January and February, they had already bought 39.8 tons of gold. So 39.8 plus 18, right? You can add up and do the sums. That is 57.8 tons of gold in 3 months the Chinese have bought. And with that, the Chinese gold reserves have gone to an all-time high. Chinese gold reserves with this have now gone up to 2,068 tons. This is the highest. Again, if you go backwards, in the 4 months before March, Chinese bought 102 tons of gold, 102 plus 18, 120 tons of gold in 5 months the Chinese have bought, right? It's a lot of gold in these global markets, because remember, all the other gold that people are buying for bedding, for jewelry, etc., all that's going on. This is not individual buying or any other buying. This is nations buying, sovereigns buying gold, or central banks or reserve bank, as we call it in India. They are buying gold and they are accumulating gold. So why are they accumulating gold? Why are the Chinese accumulating gold? Once again, look at the biggest buyers in January. And again, you get an idea of where the world is going. The biggest buyers in January are Turkey, China and Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan, until now, over the previous several quarters, actually was a net seller of gold from its reserves. So they are also accumulating gold. So, as I told you, gold is back in fashion. And in this period, in fact, India also added 2.8 tons of gold. So it's not as if India is staying out of the party. So a lot of this data is coming from World Gold Council, which keeps track of all this. Now, these purchases, essentially by sovereign governments, by central banks across the world, they have driven up the gold price. So just a couple of days back, in fact, the gold had risen to $2,032 per ounce. Now, I don't know why, but a lot of the calculations on gold are done in ounces, which is very difficult for people like us brought up in the metric system. In fact, my generation was rectified from the old system to the metric system in our very early schooling days. So it becomes very difficult to do a mental calculation. So I've had it here. If you convert ounces into tons, then 35,270 ounces make 1 ton, and 1 ounce is about 28.3 grams, right? So gold rose to $2,032 per ounce 2 days back. That was just about $43 below the highest ever gold price. And imagine, when was the highest ever gold price? And you will understand what gold is for nations, right? The highest ever gold price was in August 2020, and that was $2,075 per ounce. Now, why is August 2020 so significant? Because that is when the first wave of COVID had peaked in the world. And the world everybody thought the world was coming to an end. Nobody had any faith in anything because nobody had any faith in the virus. Nobody knew what the virus was, and the vaccine was still not there. So countries then started buying gold, and families started buying gold as a hedge. Because whenever you have fear and panic, you buy gold. Nations, human beings, they all behave the same way. So already gold is close to the highest ever level in history. In fact, gold fell a little bit after this recent peak or 2023 peak of $2,032 by about $40 because the American job data came out to be more positive. But once again, gold has begun to inch up. It's again crossed $2,000. And one of the reasons that's happening is because the countries are buying so much gold. When the countries open up their purses, you know that the entire market changes. It's so important also to see what's happened in the first 2 months of this year because data comes with a lag. And these are sovereign purchases, central bank purchases. So if you look at this, first of all, today, the purchases in the first 3 months of a year are the highest ever for any year since 2010, 13 years. Why is 2010 important? Because 2008-9, the global financial crisis took place. And once again, central banks were looking for safety, so they were buying more gold. So 2010 it is when central banks across the world became net buyers. Until then, they had been net sellers because many countries have been keeping a lot of their reserves in gold. Look at the US, for example. US keeps a very large percentage, in fact, among the highest of all countries. US keeps 67% of its reserves in gold. US is 67, Germany is 66, Italy is 63, France is 58. I mean, just for your reference, because there'll be curiosity, India is about 8.1% of its reserves are kept in gold, depending on what the price is at that point. China is even less. China is just 3.55% of its reserves in gold, which means China has a lot of headroom available to buy more gold. And from all indications, look like the Chinese are buying more gold. So if you look at the history comparison of these first 2 months of the year, going back to 2013, you can see that from 2010 to 13, overall central bank net purchases have remained below 20 tons. In fact, between 10 and 20 tons, some cases closer to 10 than 20. Then suddenly it has begun to rise. It has risen first of all in 2013, and something interesting has happened in the world. I don't know if you can connect one with the other. 2012 is when Xi Jinping gets elected. 2013 is when he's beginning to exercise his power. So maybe the Chinese are buying, maybe the others are buying, or maybe we are reading too much into it. But 2016 onwards, it starts rising. And 2019, for the first time, it rises to 100 tons, right? 100 tons of global central bank purchases, net purchases, because they also sell some, is a very big deal. Again, if you look at 2020, 21, 22, it's remained quite low. It's remained below 100 tens net for all countries. 2023 it is that it has shot up. It has shot up. One, the Russians never told us until now that they were accumulating over last year, but now other countries have begun to buy, obviously because it's looking like the war in Ukraine is going to go on, and also the American sanctions are not easing, and further the American inflation, the flip-flops that are taking place in American policy. For example, a bank fails, the US government bails the bank out. That is such an anti-capitalist act, because if you believe in capitalism, then you should let failures fail. So let failures die, other people will come and take its place. That is the creative destruction of capitalism. But the Americans did not allow that with SVB Bank, and that has sent a very negative signal across the world, because people have begun to worry now. Central bankers have begun to worry that, look, what are the Americans worried about? Are Americans going to play by rules when it affects their interests, or are they going to change the rules when it affects their interests? So there is a little bit of distrust coming in. The Americans think they can print more money, and other people will come and invest in their currency or buy their treasury bills, and they can then carry out these bailouts. That bailout has been seen as a confidence destroying act, and that is also one of the things that many of the sovereigns are now reacting to. So if you look at the first 2 months of this year, granular data, country-wise data, the biggest buyer in the first 2 months of this year is, guess which country, right? It's quite a surprise for me also. It's little Singapore. So they bought in Jan and Feb this year 51.4 tons, which is the next biggest buyer. Hello. Member of NATO, Turkey, 45.5 tons of gold. Its own currency completely decimated, its own inflation completely off the charts, but Turkey is buying gold because Turkey lives in a very uncertain geography, and Turkey tends to plan for the future. Turkey has a very strategic mind. So the biggest purchaser, buyer of gold for central banks. In the first 2 months, Singapore, 51.4 tons, Turkey, 45.5 tons, then China, 39.8 tons, then Russia 31.1. But as I said earlier, and as mining.com also tells us, that may not just be the purchase of these 2 months. Maybe the Russians are accumulating through the previous year, but they've disclosed their figures now. India, I think I mentioned earlier, 2.8 tons. So this is what's going on right now. Now BRICS. The important thing is, when you look at this data, I told you earlier on that I will show you this data to tell you how BRICS, the BRICS fantasy is not something in which even the BRICS countries believe. So among the prominent buyers of gold, people who are going into the refuge of gold or buying gold as a hedge to the dollar are 4 of the 5 BRICS nations. That is Brazil, Russia, India and China. I'm just reading this out, not in any order, but in the order in which these nations appear in the BRICS acronym. So B for Brazil, R for Russia, I for India, C for China. 4 of them are accumulating more gold. So that tells you that even 4 of the 5 BRICS nations don't particularly believe in this new fantasy, which is very popular on social media and some TV channels, some ultra-nationalist TV channels, that there'll be a BRICS currency, fantastic, and we'll show Uncle Sam his place. No. 4 of the 5 BRICS countries are buying gold, and the 5th, South Africa, has a very small economy in comparison, just about $500 billion, and South Africa itself is a very large producer of gold in any case, and South Africa in any case is not in the league at all. Now gold, a lot of the people think that if the world is moving towards multipolarization, that is from a unipolar situation, then in a unipolar world, dollar was America's super weapon. If this is going to be a multipolar world, then gold actually could become an instrument of multipolarization or a weapon of multipolarization. Now, whether this will actually happen or not, don't ask me. I don't have expertise in this area, and I don't have enough to read, because I suspect a lot will be written about this in days to come. As we have knowledge accumulating, we will come back to you with some more wisdom. I am no expert on this. This is not my domain knowledge. I cannot take a call, but I'd say if you look at the state of the world right now, keep watching gold. And keep watching gold if you want to understand the state of the world right now.